So I have another viewer question from Paul. And Paul asks how you would approach a language with a new phonetic orthography and how you would balance reading or writing study with listening or speaking study. Would you start with learning to read and write immediately? Or would you start with materials that have Romanized versions and ease your way into writing?
I never have liked Romanization. But there are some script systems out there, like Chinese and Japanese, that are complicated enough that to demand of a beginner that you learn those first, and that would, if you have no knowledge of that would really slow down the entire process. Whereas if you look at the grammatical structure and acquire some vocabulary and get some familiarity with the language and listen to it and speak it and understand the other difficulty with those languages, when you do learn the script, it's not just the difficulty of that, the number of strokes, but associating the sound with it. So you'd learn the sound, and then you have some sound to associate with the strokes later. So I think it makes sense to do that with languages like Chinese and Japanese. Korean, on the other hand, has its own phonetic alphabet, so there's no reason to hold off on learning Hangul. And when you're trying to learn Hangul and you have Romanization there, it actually hurts you. It stops you. It's a crutch that you don't need, and your eyes are so much more used to looking at it that it takes your attention away from the native orthography. So it's a case-dependent situation. I mean, the two of the three major East Asian languages, for example, I would say, yes, it makes some sense to do that. The other one, I'd say, absolutely not. No, you should just learn Hangul if you're going to learn Korean, and then you absolutely need to learn Hanja as well. So, but you'll be able to do that through Hangul, which is much better than doing it through Romanization. For other script systems, did he ask what specific languages he's talking about? I just gave some examples of that came, but...
I think it's a general question, but he did give the examples of like Hangul is easy, and then Khmer has 74 letters, and that's clearly much more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know as much about the languages of Southeast Asia, but yeah, when I think about it, some script systems just make your eyes spin. I think they're Dravidian derived. I think from the Tamil and Telugu also are very, very curly. And I think that, that your eyes just swim and you can't distinguish the forms of them. So those languages too, it might make some sense to begin that way. But I think ideally, pedagogically, it would be better if you could get large, clear print versions of scripts like that. I mean, if there's any sort of basic of either alphabetic or phonetic types, syllabic type structure, then I think it only makes sense to learn that as early as possible and do that. If there's no correspondence between the shape and the form, and if you're thinking about, learning Mayan or something like that, or ancient Egyptian, those are other very, very difficult hieroglyphic type forms as well. So I guess it's language dependent, but beyond that, what I just said, if there's any kind of correspondence between the shape and the sound, then it makes sense, I think, to learn that right away. But if there isn't, and if the shape sort of elude your eyes or your attention, then yes, if you have something of a foundation in your understanding of the structure and what you're saying and that kind of thing, then that facilitates the learning of the script too.
Okay. And then he has just one, and then he asked if you have approached a language with a totally different writing system, and if you had any general rules for doing so.
Totally different writing system? So what does he mean by that? Like what we
I guess like unlike Latin alphabet. Yeah.
Well, sure. I've learned Korean pretty well. I studied Chinese and Japanese. Never did, what did you talk about, Khmer or anything like that. I've never done a Dravidian system, but Sanskrit, Hindi, Arabic, Urdu, Persian, Greek, Russian, even in European languages, there's some really interesting variants just to study for the sake of it, like with Irish, which I think has its own, sort of slightly different orthography, but also the old Ogham script and the runic characters. So, yeah, I've learned.
Okay, and like any general tips?
It is hard. It is hard. Don't delude yourself. Even the one, Hangul claims to be the easiest, and maybe it is, but it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get your eyes accustomed to new shapes and forms. Even scripts like Russian and Greek, which are ultimately derived from the thing, then you have the opposite difficulty of there are letters that look like I think I know them, but they have different sounds. So you have to retrain your mind to see the B as a V. You have to, so there was always a challenge. And if a language has a different script, that adds a chalk mark of difficulty to it, and just know that. But it's fun, it's interesting, and if you chip away at it, it gets there. And it's very gratifying when you no longer have that difficulty, and that day will come if you just practice reading aloud and trying not to sound wooden, trying to sound like a narrator, trying to sound like you feel what you're saying, making it, feeling the language and reading the language. If you do that, and again, you always need to, with anything, you need to repeat. You don't just do things one time. You do it, and then you improve it, and you get it better again. And at a certain point, you move on to something else, but you always do things several times. And as long as you're feeling progress, hey, I'm reading this better, I think you'll notice that. So it's very gratifying when you can get a different script system down, and I think that feeling is a reward for the work and the time that you do need to put into it. Okay, thanks for this evening of asking me questions. I think it's time for us to stop now, and maybe we'll go have dinner or something. It's Thanksgiving, so thank you for coming and visiting me. Thank everybody for listening to us here on this evening. And again, if anybody's interested in popping by the Academy to meet me and Xing Hao and all the other interesting people that we have in our reading and discussion circles and see what they're like and if they might be right for you, please write to Xing Hao.